The place, Indianapolis Motor Speedway. The time, just before 11 o'clock on the last Sunday in May. Over 300,000 fans wait for the start of what's been called the biggest sporting event in the world, the Indy500, America's most famous race and the richest prize in motorsport. The razzmatazz is nearly over. The preparations and build-up have been going on throughout the month of May. Now the 33 fastest cars from qualifying runs take their place on the starting grid. Ahead lie 500 miles on the Speedway's oval track. The speeds will be astonishing. The fastest cars will touch 230 miles an hour. The rewards match the risk. Prize money of $7 million. Driver Emerson Fittipaldi will earn over $1 million if he wins. More importantly, an Indy champion takes his place in the pantheon of American heroes.
When you win Indianapolis, made in America, your life change. I mean, when you go anywhere, they don't say that's Emerson, that's the Indy winner. I mean, that's incredible how popular and how big Indianapolis is in America, and not just in America, all over the world, but mainly here is amazing.
The 2.5-mile oval is the best-known example of America's unique approach to motor racing. The British Indy winner Jim Clark described it as 800 left-hand bends. But then American racing grew up in a different tradition, a world away from the elite Grand Prix circuits of Europe. American racing developed on the dirt tracks of small-town USA, and it still flourishes there. Events were often held at state fairgrounds on oval tracks designed for horse racing. The sprint cars that roared around the bumpy tracks were usually driven by their owners, who relied on the cash prizes to stay in racing. In those early days, this is where a driver made his name.
This was very popular racing. On 1,000 Sunday afternoons, the dust was flying in the bull rings of America. And it was hairy racing. And the way you proved that you were in the top rank was, as my colleague Joe Scalzo puts it, by dying. Dangerous. Only thing I can compare it to is bullfighting, the way they carried him out of there.
Driving a sprint car, I tell you, you better have your mind totally 100% on your driving. You better pay very close attention to what you're doing, and you better be in good physical condition, because it's a very demanding race as far as strength is concerned, because you had to manhandle a sprint car on the dirt because you had to fight the chassis too. It's very exciting. I'll tell you, the people in the grandstand just go wild, and the best man wins. That day, anyway. I drove a couple times without a helmet at all, and never had gloves, never had a jacket, just a T-shirt, the same T-shirt that you go down at the 5 and 10 cent store and buy a T-shirt and slip it on.
The American motor industry, unlike the European, was not involved in racing. It was left to specialist car makers to meet the demands of America's racing drivers. The outstanding designer of the time, the manufacturer of this revolutionary car, was Harry Miller. Son of a German immigrant, he was an intuitive engineer without much formal education. From his factory in Los Angeles came a stream of successful racing cars like this Miller 122. In 17 seasons from 1921, Miller cars won 87 championship races. With the help of draftsman Leo Gusen and machinist Fred Offenhauser, his design shaped American racing cars for years to come.
What distinguishes the classic Miller engine and the Offenhauser and the Drakes after it for half a century was all present in the original Miller 8 of 1920. This built-up construction was a godsend to the typical American racer. He was, more often than not, an owner-driver. He was utterly dependent on what he made racing his car for his livelihood. And another thing Miller did, he produced these lovely items in quantity to the most exacting specifications. Every part had a drawing. You could order a part from Miller or later from Offenhauser or Drake with reasonable confidence that it would fit your engine 3,000 miles away. They blew up a fair amount. They were stressed. And when they started supercharging them, there was an awful lot of supercharger trouble. And the amazing thing was the supercharger was right between your legs in the 91s and 122s. And when the little fast-spinning impeller came apart, you really had to pull your toes back in a hurry. And you had the clutch down there, too. You were really riding in a cockpit with a lot of shrapnel about to come up in your face.
For a brief and spectacular period in the 20s, America embraced a new kind of racing well suited to the sleek and powerful Millers, board speedways. These were high-banked ovals built entirely of wooden planks. A typical mile-and-a-quarter track required over 1 million feet of timber. Their attraction was their speed.
This was an elegant form of racing, which was unusual for the American grease monkey race driver image from the dirt tracks. The speeds were incredible. Harry Hart's went in 1926 with a Miller 122, averaged over 135 miles an hour for 300 miles.
Board tracks were hard to maintain. Weather and wheels shredded the wooden surfaces. Gaps in the planking caused crashes like the one that killed Ray Keach, a famous driver of the day. Lou Meyer was just behind him.
Ray Keach went by me to take over first place. And he apparently hit a hole. He hit the top guardrail, which there was a steel band bolted all the way around the track to it. It came down across the track. When I came into the turn, I see this ribbon coming down off the top. For an instant, I didn't realize what had happened, but then I hit it.
Board racing was killed by the Depression. There was no longer the money to maintain the tracks. One by one, they shut down.
All these board tracks are gone now. They were blown down in hurricanes, they burned up, or they just gave way to the ravages of wind and weather. The last one, Altoona, was torn down in 1931.
The event that survived was the Indy500. It was inaugurated in 1911, 2 years after the speedway was opened. Early on, the track was paved with 3 million bricks and so got its nickname, the Brickyard. European cars and drivers raced there for the first few years, but by 1920 it had become an almost exclusive American preserve. What was needed was a reliable car with a powerful engine, able to run at high speeds for many hours. Brakes and gearboxes were less important. And these were the sort of cars Harry Miller excelled in making. Like the English designer Colin Chapman 30 years later, Miller was obsessed with building cars as light as possible. In this pioneering front-wheel drive Miller 91, he did away with the prop shaft, seated the driver lower, and so reduced the car's size and weight. He even experimented with the rear-engine car at Indy in 1938. His impact on the race lasted for years. Offenhauser's development of Miller engines powered Indy winners right up until 1978. Harry Miller's cars, in one form or another, made the Indy500 their own. Lou Meyer drove Millers to victory 3 times.
We certainly had a fine ride today. The car ran wonderful. We had plenty of gasoline left. We had a nice day, and it certainly was a most enjoyable race I've ever had here since I've been running, and this makes my third win for the 500-mile race at Indianapolis.
The track was rough, and the bricks would buckle on account of the heat. And at Indianapolis, in the first turn, you wouldn't come back on the ground on account of that bump there for sometimes 30, 40 feet.